the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic.
Si Alan.
Your mom with the conference intervention camera. You're not.
Ang gulo lang. Ang buo. '21st session of the Senate and the second regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. We will be led in prayer today by our distinguished colleague from Taguig and Pateros, no other than Senator Alan Peter Cayetano.
Let's all prepare ourselves and remember we're in the holy presence of our Lord and God. Lord Father God, many, many times we ask you to increase our faith because when we look at you and you tell us that we can move mountains if we had the faith as small as a mustard seed. But you remind us that it is not for us to pray for more faith because you already told us that faith comes from hearing. Faith comes from knowing you, your nature. Faith grows as we get to know you better, as we have faith in each other as an institution, as we have faith in our people because we know our people. You want us to get to know you better. Lord, sometimes we are hungry and we pray for food. People do not have houses and we pray for housing. People spend many, many hours on the road, and even today, through Senator Grace Poe, we heard the budget of the DOTR. Yet you remind us, seek first your kingdom and your righteousness, and everything, every single thing will be added upon to us. So Lord, as we seek a better country, as we seek transformation, as we seek, Lord God, to please you, we ask that we follow your model. We are a people who keep looking for models, Lord God, models for transportation, models for agriculture, models for change, models for democracy. But there is a model that you have given us through your word. So we lift this up to you and we ask that we may be your legislators in accordance with your way, your will, Lord, and always in accordance with your word. We pray and ask for this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen. Secretary, please call the roll of members.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
With 22 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader, before we start, I'd just like to thank our distinguished colleague from Antique, Senator Lauren Legarda, our Senate President Pro Temp, for this another gift of asin sa is it buyo? From Botolan, Zambales. Yes, the home province of Senator Jinggoy. I think the mother of Jinggoy is from Zambales.
And
And also Senator Pimentel.
Pimentel, yes, Mr. President.
Zambales.
Yesterday was asin from Bohol.
From Bohol, yes.
So tomorrow, we are expecting asin from Antique.
This is also artisanal, right?
Artisanal,
Thank you.
yes, so as in, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we continue, may I just acknowledge some guests from the gallery? We have with us Congressman Celso Rehencia of Iligan City, Congressman Jojo Ang of Uswag Ilonggo Party List, Congressman Christian Unabia from the 1st District of Misamis Oriental, Governor Peter Unabia of Misamis Oriental is here, Mayor Elizabeth Matugas of Dapa, Siargao Island, Mayor Liseldo Kalugay of Suwal, Pangasinan, Mayor J. Bago of Opol, Misamis Oriental, Mayor Eric Cañosa of Guingoog City, Misamis Oriental, guest of Senator Francis Tolentino. We welcome them in this August chamber, Mr. President.
We welcome all our guests from all over the country. Welcome to your Senate. Would you wish for a minute suspension?
Yes, and
so we can,
Congressman Plaza, Mr. President, is also here. We'd
Yes,
like to,
Congressman Plaza is here as
acknowledge him.
well, of course.
Thank you.
So
Yes, of
we
Senator Bong Revilla.
Suspend
Thank you, Mr.
session for
President.
1 minute. to please settle down.
Thank you. Isa na lang. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There being no objection, I ask the Secretary to proceed with the reference of business.
Bill on first reading, Senate number 2434, creating a sustainable framework for the pension system of the armed forces of the Philippines, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
Committee on National Defense, Government Corporations, Ways and Means and Finance.
Resolutions, proposed Senate Resolution 782, congratulating and commending the 2023 Metrobank Foundation Outstanding Filipinos or honored during conference ceremony on August 29, 2023 at the Grand Hyatt Manila in Taguig City, Philippines by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Rules.
783, congratulating and commending the students of the Philippine Science High School for their achievements at the 16th International Astronomy and Astrophysics Olympiad held in Warsaw, Poland. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
784, congratulating and commending Ernest John E.J. Obiena for winning gold at the 2023 International Stadion Fest in Berlin, Germany. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
Resolution 785, resolution congratulating and commending Team Philippines for being crowned the overall grand champion at the World Championship of Performing Arts held from July 28 to August 6, 2023 in Anaheim, California, USA. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
786, congratulating and commending John Lloyd Cruz for winning the best prestigious Bocalino de Oro Prize for Best Actor at the 76th Locarno Film Festival in Switzerland. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
787, resolution to congratulate and recognize Mr. Wency Villanueva and his corgi, Dalbong, for claiming the world winner Best of Breed and Swiss champion titles in the prestigious World Dog Show 2023 held in Geneva, Switzerland from August 24 to 27, 2023. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules. Okay.
Additional
There's
reference of
additional reference of business.
Resolutions. Proposed Senate Resolution 788, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on an incident involving a security guard assaulting a motorcycle rider with a metal barrier and other abuses committed by security guard. Senator Ercito.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
789, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the alleged regular service of search warrants by the PNP CID Group Regional Health Field Unit National Capital Region against Mabini, Batangas Mayor Nilo Villanueva and his brother. Senator Ejercito.
Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Justice and Human Rights.
791, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the alleged failure of artificial intelligence companies to abide by the labor standards of the Philippines for the Filipino workers. Senator Marcos.
Committees on Labor and Employment, Science and Technology.
Committee report 119 by the Committee on Foreign Relations on proposed Senate Resolution 790, concurring in the ratification of the agreement between the government of the Philippines and the government of His Majesty the Sultan and Yang de Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam for the avoidance of double taxation and the prevention of fiscal evasion with respect to taxes on income. Recommending its approval without amendment, sponsor Senator Marcos.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1846. This is the bill on the Internet Transactions Act of 2022. I so move, Mr. President.
Before I act on that, guys, the reading of the journal, hindi pa na. The journal, we take up the journal after the motion. You want to
After,
take up the
Mr.
ITA?
President,
Okay.
if it's okay.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measures that we are now in the period of individual amendments. And with that, I move to resume the period of individual amendments using the amended copy of the bill dated August 22, 2023 as our working draft. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, the distinguished gentleman from Las Piñas, Senator Mark Villar, to continue with his individual amendments.
Our distinguished colleague from the city of Las Piñas, Senator Mark Villar, is recognized. Our Deputy Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, let me take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the officers who helped us refine this landmark bill. To the Office of the Senate President, Senate Mig Subiri, to the Office of the Senate Secretary, and to the Senate Legislation Department for the organization of the whole bill's suggestion on definition of terms, clarity on the bill's coverage, and clarification on other several essential provisions. To the Office of the Majority Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, for helping improve the language of the bill, functions of the E-commerce Bureau, and on definition of terms. To the Office of Senator Pia Cayetano, for the valuable comments on the standards of the powers to be given to DTI on the coverage of this act and the composition and functions of the E-commerce Bureau. To the Office of Senator Lauren Legarda, for the suggestions on the subpoena provision and powers of DTI under ITA. To the Office of Senator Grace Poe, in suggesting language for the integration of data and information security of the details to be gathered pursuant to ITA. To the Office of Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, for helping craft the liability provision to ensure that consumers will not be left with no recourse. To the Office of Senator Risa Ontiveros, for suggesting language on important consumer protection provisions of ITA. And to the Office of the Minority Floor Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel, who championed the ITA under the 18th Congress for ensuring that there will be a balance on the protection of both online consumers and the online merchants, among other things. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, may I be allowed to introduce amendments to Section 2 on Declaration of Policy and other sections that have been previously amended. The amendments to be introduced are based on the clean copy from the Legislative Bills and Index Service as of August 22, 2023.
Yes, please proceed, Your Honor.
On page 1, section 2 on Declaration of Policy, delete the entire text, specifically from line 3 to page 2, line 8, and replace it with the following. Section 2, Declaration of Policy. It is the policy of the state to promote and maintain a robust electronic commerce, e-commerce environment in the country by building trust between online merchants and online consumers. The state recognizes the value and potential of the digital economy to increase the competition and improve productivity. Toward this end, the state shall guarantee effective regulation of e-commerce to protect consumer rights and data privacy, encourage innovation, promote competition, secure internet transactions, uphold intellectual property rights, and ensure product standards and safety compliance, and observe environmental sustainability. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
On page 2, delete the entire section 3 on scoping coverage, specifically from line 9 to 22, and replace it with the following. Section 3, scoping coverage. This act shall apply to all business-to-business and business-to-consumer internet transactions within the mandate of the Department of Trade and Industry, where one of the parties is situated in the Philippines or where the digital platform, e-retailer, or online merchant is availing of the Philippine market and has minimum contacts therein, provided that online media content and consumer-to-consumer transactions shall not be covered under this act. On the same page, line 23, section 4 on definition of terms, insert the following text after the hyphen. As used in this act, A, business-to-business transaction refers to internet transactions between businesses, such as between a manufacturer and a wholesaler, or a wholesaler and a retailer, whether or not the transacting parties are natural or juridical persons. B, business-to-consumer transaction refers to internet transactions between businesses and end users. C, consumer-to-consumer transactions refer to transactions between end users done for personal, family, or household purposes and not done in the ordinary course of business. D, digital platforms refer to information and communication technology-enabled mechanisms that connect and integrate producers and users in online environments where goods and services are requested, developed, and sold, and data generated and exchanged such as, but not limited to e-marketplace, mobile application platforms, online delivery platforms, social media platforms, and travel platforms. E, e-marketplace refers to digital platforms whose business is to connect online consumers with online merchants, facilitate and conclude the sales, process the payment of the products, goods, or services through the platform, or facilitate the shipment of goods or provide logistics services and post-purchase support within such platforms, and otherwise retain oversight over the consummation of the transaction. F, e-retailer refers to a natural or juridical person selling goods or services directly to online consumers through its own website, web page, or application. G, goods refer to physically or digitally produced items over which ownership or proprietary rights may be established and transferred from one institutional unit to another by entering into a transaction. H, Internet transaction refers to the sale or lease of digital or non-digital goods and services over the internet. For purposes of this act, internet transactions shall also refer to e-commerce. I, online consumer refers to a natural or juridical person who purchases, leases, receives, or subscribes to goods or services over the internet for a fee. J, online merchant refers to a person selling non-financial goods or services to online consumers through an e-marketplace or third-party digital platform. An e-retailer shall also be considered an online merchant if it offers the same goods or services outside its own website through a third-party digital platform, and the online consumer purchases, leases, subscribes to, or obtains the service of the e-retailer through the said third-party platform. And K, producer refers to the manufacturer or importer of goods or any person purporting to be a manufacturer who places its name, trademark, or other distinctive sign on goods. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted subject to style.
On page 2, delete the entire section 5 on purposeful availment and extraterritorial applications, specifically from page 2, line 24, until page 3, line 4, and replace it with the following. Section 5, extraterritorial application. A person who engages in e-commerce, who avails of the Philippine market to the extent of establishing minimum contacts herein, shall be subject to applicable Philippine laws and regulations and cannot evade legal liability in the Philippines despite lack of legal presence in the country. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is adopted.
On page 3, line 17, under section 7, on creation and composition of the e-commerce bureau, insert the phrase, and at least one assistant director after the word director. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
On the same page, line 19, delete the entire sentence beginning with the words "there shall be" until the word "operations" on line 20. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
Still on the same page, line 23, after the word management, insert the phrase "and consistent with civil service laws, rules, and regulations." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, amendment is adopted.
On page 3, section 8, on functions of the e-commerce bureau, delete the entire subsection specifically from line 30 until page 4, line 2, and replace it with the following. C, exert efforts to enforce the registration of digital platforms and online merchants with the bureau and to require the submission of information necessary for policymaking and program development purposes, consistent, however, with the principles of minimization and proportionality in data privacy. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is adopted.
On page 4, still on section 8, delete the entire subsection E specifically from line 6 until line 9 and replace it with the following. E, receive and refer business and consumer complaints on internet transactions to the appropriate government agency consistent with the no wrong door policy of the DTI. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is adopted.
On the same page, still on section 8, delete the entire subsection F, specifically from line 10 to 12, and replace it with the following. F, coordinate with or petition through the DTI Secretary, whenever appropriate, any entity, government agency, or instrumentality to take action on any matter that may impede e-commerce. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, amendment is adopted.
On the same page, lines 13 to 14, section A, subsection G, delete the phrase beginning the word file until the word act and replace with recommend the filing of the appropriate case for violations of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
Still on the same page, delete the entire subsection H, specifically from line 15 to 17. Succeeding subsections shall be relettered accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
Still on the same page, from line 18 to 20, delete subsection I and replace it with the following. H, monitor the implementation of this act for policymaking and program development purposes. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
Still on the same page, lines 21 to 22, delete subsection J and replace it with the following. I, develop consumer education and information programs for consumers of different ages, incomes, and literacy, giving special attention to the needs of vulnerable and disadvantaged consumers by raising awareness on rights, responsibilities, and red flags in internet transactions, with the goal of enabling consumers to make informed choices and preventing them from falling prey to online frauds and scams. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
Still on page 4, line 26, section 8, now subsection J. Delete the entire sentence beginning with the word notwithstanding until the word laws on line 29. Then insert the word and after the semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 30, delete letter L and replace it with K. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
No further amendments on page 4. On page 5, insert a new paragraph between lines 2 and 3 to read as follows. The powers of the Bureau shall not be exercised in a manner that stifles innovation, restricts competition, creates barriers to entry in trade, or impedes the ease of doing business. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
On the same page, delete the entire section 10 on online business registry, specifically from line 9 to line 14, and replace it with the following. Section 10, Online Business Database. Within 1 year from the effectivity of this act, the Bureau shall establish a database of digital platforms, e-marketplace, e-retailers, and online merchants engaged in e-commerce in the Philippines that will provide the government and online consumers access to contact information of online business. In establishing the OBD, the DTI shall utilize existing business databases and coordinate with other agencies that already maintain the same or similar database. The DTI, in consultation with the DICT, the National Privacy Commission, the Philippine Competition Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Cooperative Development Authority, and other concerned agencies shall issue the regulations to govern the development, management, operation, and maintenance of the online business, the OBD, the Online Business Database. Consistent with Republic Act number 11032 or the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act of 2018. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments adopted.
On the same page, delete the entire section 11, specifically from line 15 to line 23, and replace it with the following. Section 11, E-commerce Philippine Trust Mark. To provide assurance of safety and security in internet transactions, the DTI shall encourage the development of an e-commerce Philippine trust mark, hereinafter referred to as the trust mark, which may be established and operated by an industry-led private sector governance body. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 29, section 12, on regulatory jurisdiction of the DTI, delete from the word shall until the word transactions on line 30 and replace it with the phrase shall exercise regulatory jurisdiction as to the use of internet for conducting e-commerce by e-marketplaces, online merchants, e-retailers, digital platforms, and third-party platforms. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
Still on the same page, line 31, after the word however, add the word that. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, still on line 31, delete the phrase or rulemaking. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, on line 32, delete the word any after the phrase an agency by. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
No further amendments on page 5. On page 6, line 1, add S to the word law to make it laws. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 8, delete the phrase that such services may involve e-commerce and replace it with an e-commerce aspect or feature in such services. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On the same page, lines 9 to 14, delete the entire section 13 on subpoena and replace it with the following. Section 13, subpoena. In the exercise of its powers under this act, the DTI Secretary shall have the power to issue summons, subpoena ad testificandum, and subpoena duces tecum to alleged violators or witnesses to compel attendance and the production of documents in investigations or proceedings before the Bureau. Failure to comply with the subpoena ad testificandum and subpoena duces tecum shall authorize the filing of a case for contempt under the rules of the court. A subpoena duces tecum is valid if issued on matters within the jurisdiction of the DTI, is reasonably relevant to the subject matter under investigation, and designates or describes the information or document sought to be produced, allowing it to be identified. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
Still on page 6, under section 14, on authority to issue compliance order, line 16, delete the phrase against any person found to be in violation of and replace with to require conformity with. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
The same page, line 18, still on section 14, delete the word laws and regulation and replace them with the phrase issuances promulgated by the DTI. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, may I now proceed with the amendments beginning from section 15 onwards?
Please proceed.
Still on page 6, delete the entire section 15 on cease and desist orders, specifically from lines 19 to 28. Subsequent sections shall be renumbered accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment, amendments approved.
On the same page, delete the entire section 16 on authority to issue takedown order, specifically from line 29 to page 7, line 30, and replace it with the following. Section 15, authority to issue takedown order. The DTI secretary, after investigation or verification, may issue an ex parte takedown order directing the removal of a listing or offer on a website, platform, or application containing the following, regardless of the intended nature of the transaction, when any of the following are present. A, sale or lease of goods or services which are prohibited or regulated under existing laws such as endangered animals, illicit drugs, fireworks, and other explosive and counterfeit goods, provided that the prohibited nature of the goods and services is apparent from the photo or description in the post. B, sale or lease of goods or services subject of a cease and desist order issued by an appropriate government agency. C, sale or lease of goods or services online previously subject of a takedown order but which are subsequently reposted and proliferated online by the seller under investigation. And D, such other transactions or activities online within the jurisdiction of the DTI purporting to sell or lease goods or services that otherwise threaten public or personal safety, compromises financial or personal information. Other regulatory government agencies may request the DTI to issue a takedown order for the removal of an online listing or offer in violation of laws, rules, or regulations under their jurisdiction. Nothing herein shall preclude the appropriate agency from exercising its regulatory authority, including the issuance of orders directly to the erring person or entity to prevent or stop the sale of goods or services under its jurisdiction. The violating entity shall be given an opportunity to be heard within 48 hours from the issuance of a takedown order. The takedown order shall be directed against the e-retailer or online merchant and the owner or operator of the e-marketplace or digital platform. Copies of the order shall likewise be served on entities whose cooperation would be required for its enforcement, such as, but not limited to, the duly registered internet service provider involved, related payment gateways, and other government agencies. The order shall remain in effect for a maximum period of 30 days unless otherwise extended or made permanent by judicial order or decision. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, amendment is approved.
On page 7, delete the entire section 17 on blacklisting of online business, specifically from line 31 to page 8, line 6, and replace it with the following. Section 16, blacklisting of online business. The DTI secretary shall have the authority to establish a publicly accessible list of websites, pages, online applications, social media accounts, or other similar platforms that fail to comply with a compliance order or are subject of a takedown order issued under Chapter 3 hereof or of a cease and desist order issued by an appropriate government agency indicating the specific violation incurred. Should the violation consist in failure to abide by a compliance order, entry into the blacklist shall indicate the act or requirement subject of the compliance order. The blacklist shall be made publicly available and shall be furnished to digital platforms and financial regulators. After compliance or correction, the DTI, motu proprio, or upon request, shall promptly remove the entry from the list without necessity of a hearing. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
On page 8, delete the entire section 18 on online dispute resolution, specifically from line 7 to page 9, line 17, and replace it with the following. Section 17, online dispute resolution. Within 6 months from the effectivity of this act, the DTI shall develop a platform to facilitate an alternative mode of dispute resolution for online consumers, online merchants, e-retailers, e-marketplaces, and other digital platforms. The DTI, in consultation with other concerned agencies, shall issue the implementing rules and regulations on ODR procedure and the development, management, operations, and maintenance of the platform. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is adopted.
On page 9, line 20, delete the words online consumer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is adopted.
On the same page, line 21, delete the word involving and replace it with the word of parties in. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 9, delete the entire section 19 on Code of Conduct, specifically from line 23 to page 11, line 27, and replace it with the following. Section 18, Code of Conduct. The DTI, in consultation with relevant government agencies, shall provide a code of conduct for all businesses engaged in e-commerce consistent with international trends, development standards, and best practices, and when necessary, issue guidelines, rules, and regulations, including voluntary and binding co-regulation mechanisms, considering their role, size, and impact in internet transactions. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion, amendments are adopted.
On page 11, delete the entire section 20 on the rights and obligations of online consumers, specifically from line 28 to page 13, line 16, and replace it with the following. Section 19, obligations of online consumers. The online consumer shall exercise ordinary diligence in any internet transaction. If the transaction includes the delivery of the purchased goods, the online consumer shall not cancel confirmed orders when the said items have already been paid for by, or the goods are perishable in nature and are already in the possession of a third-party delivery service, or otherwise in transit to the online consumer, unless A, the online consumer uses electronic or digital payment and authorize the crediting of the amount despite cancellation. B, the online consumer reimburses the third-party delivery service as a precondition for the cancellation of the order. C, the transaction allows cancellation for a fee. Or D, the parties agree otherwise. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments adopted.
On page 13, between lines 16 and 17, insert a new section 20, which shall contain the following heading and text. Section 20, remedies of online consumers. In case of defect, malfunction, or loss without the fault of the online consumer or failure to conform with warranty or any liability of the online merchant or e-retailer arising from the contract, the online consumer shall have the right to pursue, repair, replacement, refund, or other remedies provided under RA 7394 or any existing relevant laws. When the online consumer avails replacement or refund as a remedy, the online merchant is entitled to the return of the original goods delivered without any cost to the online consumer within a reasonable period from the receipt thereof, unless otherwise agreed upon by the parties. In case the refund is already paid, but the goods cannot be returned due to the fault of the online consumer, the amount received shall be immediately reimbursed to the online merchant or e-retailer subject to proportionate reduction in price if appropriate. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 13, section 21 on obligations of e-marketplaces and other digital platforms, delete the entire section, specifically from line 17 to page 14, line 29, and replace it with the following. Section 21, obligations of e-marketplaces. Except as otherwise provided in this act, e-marketplaces shall A, ensure that the internet transactions on their platform are clearly identifiable as an e-commerce transaction. 2, identify the person or persons in whose behalf the e-commerce transaction is made. 3, identify any promotional offer, including any discount, premium, or gift, and that conditions required to qualify for it are accessible, clear, and unambiguous.
There,
1 minute suspension.
session suspended.
As far as practicable, all online merchants, whether foreign or Filipino, to submit the following prior to listing with their platforms. 1, name of the online merchant accompanied by at least one valid government identification card for individuals or business registration documents for juridical entities. 2, geographic address where the online merchant is located. 3, contact details of the online merchant, which must include a mobile or landline number and a valid email address. And 4, in instances where the services offered by an online merchant is connected with the exercise of a regulated profession, the details of membership in any professional body or similar relevant institution with which the online merchant is registered or otherwise is a member of. Except for the government identification cards or registration documents mentioned under Section 21, the information required under this paragraph shall be published or posted in the e-marketplace or digital platform for transparency, unless the e-marketplace for e-commerce platform establishes means to facilitate the communication to facilitate communication between online merchants and online consumers, or provides a link to the OBD on the provide specific information upon the issuance of a subpoena by competent authority pursuant to an investigation based on a sworn complaint stating that the e-marketplace or e-retailer is being used in the commission of a crime, or that it was utilized as a means to commit a malicious, fraudulent, or an unlawful act, and that the complaint is unable to ascertain the identity of the perpetrator. D, take the necessary precautions to protect the data privacy of consumers at all times in accordance with the Republic Act number 10173 or the Data Privacy Act of 2012, and comply with the minimum information security standards set by the E-commerce Bureau, NPC, and other issuances of relevant government agencies. Digital platforms and e-marketplaces shall be covered by the provisions of RA 10173 and issuances by the NPC. E, prohibit the sale of regulated goods unless they provide the necessary permits and license information, and contractually obligating their compliance with sale procedures and limitations and other relevant conditions for the sale as may be imposed by any law or local government regulation. F, provide an effective and responsive redress mechanism for online consumers and online merchants to report a user or information posted on the platform that are deemed in violation of relevant laws. G, require all online merchants to clearly indicate the following in their product offers online, regardless of the nature of the goods and services. 1, name and brand of the goods or services. 2, price. 3, description. 4, condition. 5, contact information of the online merchant. In performing their obligations under this section, e-marketplaces and other digital platforms are required to observe ordinary diligence. Failure to do so will subject them to penalties under Section 29 of this Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments adopted.
On page 14, delete the entire Section 22, specifically from line 30 to page 15, line 2, and replace it with the following. Section 22, obligations of other digital platforms that do not retain oversight over the consummation of the transaction. Other digital platforms that do not retain oversight over the consummation of the transaction shall have the following obligations. A, enable consumers to distinguish between commercial and non-commercial or private accounts. B, prohibit the sale and advertisement of regulated goods unless they provide the necessary permits and license information, and contractually obligating their compliance with the sale procedures and limitations and other relevant conditions for the sale as may be imposed by any law or local government regulation. C, require online merchants to indicate the following in their product offers online, regardless of the nature of the goods and services. 1, name and brand of the goods or services. 2, price. 3, description. 4, condition. D, provide an effective and responsive redress mechanism for online consumers and online merchants to report a user or information posted on the platform that are deemed in violation of relevant laws. E, maintain as far as practicable an updated list of accounts that make use of the platform for e-commerce. The platform shall be required to provide specific information upon the issuance of a subpoena by a competent authority pursuant to an investigation based on a sworn complaint stating that the platform covered under this section is being used in the commission of a crime, or that it was utilized as a means to commit a malicious, fraudulent, or unlawful act, and that the complaint is unable to ascertain the identity of the perpetrator. F, take the necessary precautions to protect the data privacy of consumers at all times in accordance with RA 10173 and comply with the minimum information security standards set by the E-commerce Bureau, NPC, and other issuances of relevant government agencies. Digital platforms and e-marketplaces shall be covered by the provisions of the Data Privacy Act and issuances by the NPC. In performing their obligations, platforms covered under this section are required to observe ordinary diligence. Failure to do so will subject them to penalties under Section 29 of this Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
No further.
Do you want to take a 30-second break?
Tapusin na natin to, SP.
Sige, sige. Tuloy mo na. Nawala ako sa'yo, Mr. Sponsor.
No further amendments on page 14. On page 15, line 4, delete the phrase goods, services, or digital products as defined under this Act and replace with digital or non-digital goods and services. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page between lines 5 and 6, insert a new subsection A followed by the phrase indicate the price of goods and services offered consistent with Article 81 of RA 7394. Succeeding subsections under this section shall be re-lettered accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 9 to 10, under Roman numeral I of now subsection B, delete the word "other features required by the sales contract and are fit," and replace them with the word "fitness." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On the same page, lines 10 to 11, still under Roman numeral 1 of now subsection B, delete the phrase "by their nature." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On page 16, line 9, and every mention thereafter, delete the words "digital product" and replace them with "digital goods or services." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On the same page, line 10, delete the word "has" and replace it with "have." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On the same page, delete the entire subsection D, specifically from line 14 to 23. Succeeding subsections under this section shall be relettered accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On the same page, delete subsection F, specifically from line 27 until page 17, line 14, and replace with the following. F, an e-retailer shall, Roman numeral 1, publish on its homepage the following. 1, its corporate and trade or business name as may be appropriate. 2, address of the physical shop or place of business. 3, contact details of the e-retailer, which must include a mobile or landline number and a valid email address to ensure direct and efficient communication with online consumers. And 4, in instances when the services offered by an e-retailer is connected with the exercise of a regulated profession, the details of a membership in any professional body or similar relevant institutions with which the e-retailer is registered or otherwise is a member of. The foregoing shall be submitted to the Bureau and must be accompanied by at least one government identification card or registration documents as valid proof of identity. Roman numeral 2, take the necessary precautions to protect the data privacy of consumers at all times in accordance with the RA 10173 and comply with the minimum information security standards set by the E-commerce Bureau, NPC, and other issuances of relevant government agencies. E-retailers and online merchants shall be covered by the provisions of the RA 10173 and issuances by the NPC. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 15, now subsection G, delete the entire text until line 17 and replace it with the following. H, where the retailer or online merchant is engaged in delivery service, it should have the right to require its online consumers to provide at least valid email address or mobile phone number before entering into a transaction. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 19, subsection H, delete the entire sentence beginning with the words an electronic invoice until the word receipt on line 20. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On the same page, delete the entire sentence from lines 23 to 26, beginning with the words "any agreement" until the words "condition." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
Still on the same page, delete the entire section 24 on obligations of online consumers of online delivery services, specifically from line 27 until page 18, line 19. Succeeding sections shall be renumbered accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On page 18, delete the entire section 25 on right to terminate the contract, specifically from line 20 until page 19, line 23, and replace it with a new section 24 on internal redress mechanism, which should have the following text. Section 24, internal redress mechanism. An aggrieved party shall avail of the internal redress mechanism of the digital platform, e-marketplace, or e-retailer prior to the filing of a complaint before any court or appropriate government agency or resorting to alternative dispute resolution. Such mechanism is deemed exhausted if the complaint remains unresolved after 15 days from filing thereof. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment, amendments adopted.
On page 19, delete the entire section 26 on liability from complaints involving products and services purchased online, specifically from line 24 all the way to page 21, line 11, and replace it with the following. Section 25, primary liability of e-retailers or online merchants. The e-retailer or online merchant shall be primarily liable for indemnifying the online consumer in civil actions or administrative complaints arising from the internet transactions without prejudice to the imposition of other penalties as may be appropriate under Section 29 of this Act and other laws. The liability of the e-marketplace or digital platform shall be treated as one and the same as the online merchant upon a finding that both are the same entity. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On page 21, insert a new section immediately after new section 25 on primary liability of e-retailers or online merchants with the following heading and text. Section 26, subsidiary liability of e-marketplaces or digital platforms. The e-marketplace or digital platform that facilitated the internet transaction subject of a civil action or administrative complaint shall be subsidiarily liable to the online consumer if any of the following circumstances are present. A, the digital platform or e-marketplace failed to exercise the ordinary diligence in complying with its obligations under Section 21 and 22 hereof, resulting in loss or damage to the online consumer. Or B, if the digital platform or e-marketplace failed after notice to act expeditiously in removing or disabling access to goods or services that either infringe on another's intellectual property rights or are subject to a takedown order by any appropriate government agency. Or C, if the online merchant has no legal presence in the Philippines and the digital platforms or e-marketplace fail to provide the contact details thereof despite notice. The subsidiary liability or digital platforms or e-marketplaces shall be limited only to the extent of damages suffered by the online consumer as a direct result of the transaction without prejudice to other liabilities that may be incurred under this act or other laws. Digital platforms or e-marketplaces shall not be held liable for their reliance in good faith on an online merchant's representations, warranties, or submitted registration documents, regardless if such information or documents are later proved to be inaccurate, false, or untrue, provided that the digital platform or e-marketplace must show evidence of good faith and that reasonable effort was exerted to ascertain and maintain the accuracy, authenticity, and veracity of the documents or information submitted. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On the same page, immediately after new Section 26 on subsidiary liability of e-marketplaces or digital platforms, insert a new section with the following heading and text. Section 27, solidarity liability of e-marketplace or digital platform. The e-marketplaces or digital platform shall be solidarily liable if it fails after notice to act expeditiously to remove or disable access to goods or services appearing on its platform that are prohibited by law, imminently injurious, unsafe, or dangerous. Liability under this section shall be without prejudice to the imposition of penalties as may be appropriate under Section 29 of this act or other laws. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, amendments approved.
On page 21, delete the entire Section 27 on damages, specifically from line 16 to line 21, and replace it with the following. Section 27, damages. The consumer may claim damages by filing a case before the court or the DTI within 2 years from this time the cause of action arose. The right to damages under this section shall be governed by the Civil Code, RA 7394, and other existing laws. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
Still on the same page, delete the entire Section 28 on penalties, specifically from lines 22 all the way to page 23, line 13, and replace it with the following. Section 29, penalties. The DTI shall impose the following administrative fines as penalty against A, an online merchant or retailer that sells, leases, or allows the sale or lease of goods or services, whether digital or not, that are imminently injurious, unsafe, dangerous, or illegally done through the internet shall be punished under the laws, rules, and regulations that prohibit or regulate such acts. The same penalty should also be imposed against a digital platform or e-marketplace if upon notice it failed to remove the content or listing that are considered imminently injurious, unsafe, dangerous, or illegal. B, an online merchant or retailer found guilty of any deceptive, unfair, or unconscionable sales act or practice done through the internet shall be in addition to the penalties imposed under RA 7394, punished with Roman numeral 1, a fine ranging from 20,000 pesos to 100,000 pesos for the first offense. Roman numeral 2, a fine ranging from 100,000 pesos to 500,000 pesos for the second offense. Roman numeral 3, a fine ranging from 500,000 pesos to 1 million pesos for the third and subsequent offenses. The same penalty shall be imposed against a digital platform or e-marketplace if, upon notice, it failed to remove the content or listing of an online merchant found to be engaged in any deceptive, unfair, or unconscionable act or practice. C, an online merchant, e-retailer, e-marketplace, or digital platform who shall willfully or unreasonably refuse to comply with the takedown order issued under this section 15A, C, D, E of this act shall be punished with Roman numeral 1, a fine ranging from 20,000 pesos to 100,000 pesos for the first offense. Roman numeral 2, a fine ranging from 100,000 pesos to 500,000 pesos for the second offense. Roman numeral 3, a fine ranging from 500,000 pesos to 1 million pesos for the third and subsequent offenses. D, any person found in violation of Section 19 or 20 of this act shall be punished in addition to the value of the goods or services subject to the transaction with Roman numeral 1, a fine not less than 100 pesos but not more than 5,000 pesos for goods or services amounting to not more than 100 pesos. Roman numeral 2, a fine not less than 1,000 pesos but not more than 10,000 pesos for goods and services amounting to more than 100 pesos but less than 1,000 pesos. Roman numeral 3, a fine not less than the value of the goods or services, but in no case shall exceed 20,000 pesos for goods or services which price exceeds 1,000 pesos. E, an online merchant, e-retailer, e-marketplace, or digital platform found in violation of Section 21, 22A, 22G, or 22J of this Act shall be punished with Roman numeral 1, a fine ranging from 5,000 pesos or 10,000 to 10,000 pesos for the first offense, or Roman numeral 2, a fine ranging from 10,000 pesos to 50,000 pesos for the second offense, Roman numeral 3, a fine ranging from 50,000 pesos to 100,000 pesos for the third and subsequent offenses. The DTI Secretary shall increase the schedule of fines indicated in this section every 5 years to maintain the real value from the time it was set. In fixing the amount of the fine, the DTI Secretary shall have regard to both gravity and the duration of the violation. The penalty of takedown shall be imposed whenever applicable, in addition to the above-mentioned penalties, by permanently removing any listing or offer on any website, webpage, online application, social media post, or on any similar platform. The application of these penalties shall be without prejudice to the civil or criminal liability of the offending party under other laws or regulations. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
On page 23, delete the entire section 29 on Oversight Committee, specifically from line 14, all the way to page 24, line 2, and replace it with the following. Section 30, Congressional Oversight Committee. A Congressional Oversight Committee, hereinafter referred to as the Internet Transaction Act, Congressional Oversight Committee, ITACOC, shall be constituted to monitor and ensure the proper implementation of this act. It shall be composed of 5 members from the Senate, which shall include the chairpersons of the Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Science, Technology, and Finance, and 5 members from the House of Representatives, which shall include the chairpersons of the Committee on Trade and Industry, Information and Communication Technology, and Appropriations, the chairpersons of the Senate Committee on Trade and Commerce, and the House of Representatives Committee on Trade and Industry shall jointly chair the committee. The ITACOC shall cease to exist after 5 years from the effectivity of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On page 24, delete the entire section 30 on implementing rules and regulations, specifically lines 3 to 32, and replace it with the following. Section 1, implementing rules and regulations within 90 days from the effectivity of this act. A committee headed by the DTI Secretary and composed of representatives from DICT, NPC, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, BSP, and other relevant government agencies as determined by the DTI shall formulate and promulgate the rules and regulations necessary for implementing the law. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
Here.
Di ba dito? Page 24.
We're on transitory provision.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
President. On page 25, delete the entire section 31 on transitory provisions, specifically lines 1 to 13, and replace it with the following. Section 32, transitory provision. A transitory period of 18 months from effectivity of this act shall be provided to all affected online merchants, e-retailers, e-marketplaces, and digital platforms to comply with the requirements of the law. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On page 25, immediately after section 32 on transitory provision, insert a new section 33 to read as follows. Section 33, applicability of the Civil Code. In construing the rights and responsibilities of the parties, Civil Code provisions on sales and obligations and contracts shall apply. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
Still on page 25, after the new section 33 on applicability of the Civil Code, a new section 34 is inserted to read as follows. Section 34, interpretation. In case of doubt, the provisions of this act, including its implementing rules and regulations and subsequent issuances by the implementing agency, shall be construed in a manner that accords the highest respect for human dignity, consumer rights, and individual privacy. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On the same page, delete the entire section 32 on appropriations, specifically from line 14 to 15, and replace it with the following. Section 35, appropriations. The amount necessary to carry out the provisions of this act shall be included in the annual General Appropriations Act of the DTI. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, oh, 1 second. Maybe, may I ask for a minute suspension? The wording, and the wording is, the provisions of this act will be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act of the DTI. The wording, according to the Secretariat, is, it should just be General Appropriations Act of the
So I'll
DTI.
just read it without of the DTI. Ganun ba?
Is it of the DTI or
So I'll just read it as Annual General Appropriations Act without
period?
of the yeah, period.
Yes.
Okay, so
So,
I'll read it now, Mr.
yes,
President.
please, will you read the
So on the same page, delete the entire section 32 on appropriations, specifically from line 14 to 15, and replace it with the following. Section 35 appropriations. The amount necessary to carry out the provisions of this act shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, delete the entire section 33 on separability clause, specifically lines 16 to 18, and replace it with the following. Section 36, separability clause. If any provision of this act is declared unconstitutional, the remainder thereof not otherwise affected shall remain in full force and effect. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, delete the entire section 34 on repeating clause, specifically lines 19 to 22, and replace it with the following. Section 37, repeating clause. All laws, presidential decrees, executive orders, letters of instruction, and administrative regulations that are consistent with the provisions of this act are hereby repealed, amended, or modified accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On the same page, delete the entire section 35 on effectivity, specifically lines 23 to 26, and replace it with the following. Section 38, effectivity. This act shall take effect after 15 days following the completion of its publication in the official gazette or in a newspaper of general circulation. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
I further move that the Secretariat be authorized to make the necessary formal adjustments subject to style.
Yes, we'd like to make the motion that all of this is subject to style on the commas, periods, positioning of the wordings, with the permission of the body. So approved. Congratulations to our sponsor. There was a lot of amendments,
That was a long one. Thank you, Mr. President.
28 pages.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Villar. Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1846. I so move, Mr. President.
Yes, to provide us with a clean copy.
Yes,
Last
Mr.
Secretary,
President.
So maybe we can act on it tomorrow.
Hopefully by tomorrow,
Hopefully.
Mr. President. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion's approved. And it being certified, Your Honor, we can also approve it on third reading tomorrow. And then we can appoint already the bicameral conference committee.
Yes, Mr. President.
We have not gotten yet the bicameral conference committee members of the bills that we passed yesterday on third reading. We'll ask Senator Villar
And
as well
Gatchalian.
as Senator Gatchalian.
Can I ask for a minute suspension, Mr.
Session
President?
suspended.
the Journal of the 20th Session, Monday, September 11, 2023, and consider the same as approved. So
There
moved.
being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed to the Senate President's designation of Senate conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions on Senate Bill number 2243 and House Bill number 8278, entitled Philippine Salt Industry Development Act. I so move, Mr. President.
Yes, the following are elected to be part of the bicameral body. Senator Cynthia Villar is chairperson, and the members are Senator Amy Marcos, Senator Lauren Legarda, Senator Bato de la Rosa, and for the minority, Senator Coco Pimentel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we would like as well, and with the permission of the body, move that we proceed to the Senate President's designation of Senate conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions of Senate Bill number 2200 and House Bill number 6574, entitled Basic Education, Mental Health, and Well-Being Promotion Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the members of the body are Senator Wing Gatchalian as chairperson, Senator Pia Cayetano, Senator Robin Padilla, and Senator Lourdes Nancy Bina in the part of the majority. On the part of the minority, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2001 under Committee Report number 43. This is the bill on new Philippine Passport Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we have closed the period of interpellations and debate. With that, I move to open the period of amendments.
There being no objection, period of amendments is open.
Mr. President, with no committee amendments, I move that we open the period of individual amendments. So move, Mr. President.
There being no committee amendments, the period of amendments is closed, committee level.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, no other than the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, Senator Amy Marcos, for her individual amendment. So move, Mr. President.
For the committee amendments, Mr.
Yes, there be no objection.
Majority
Our
Leader.
distinguished colleague from the great province of Ilocos, Ilocandia, Senator Amy Marcos is recognized.
Yes, thank you very much. And with that, may we go into the individual amendments that the committee proposes as follows. On page 1, lines 4 to 13, and page 2, lines 1 and 2, to delete the entire section 2 and replace with the following section 2.
May I ask for may I ask for a minute suspension so that we may just follow the, we'll ask for your ma'am. We will Attorney Mabig gave me the wrong page. Okay, so shall we start? My apologies. Please proceed.
Okay, I think we're all in possession of the same copy.
Yes, please
And that being the case, the first amendment will be as follows. On page 1, lines 4 to 13, page 2, lines 1 and 2, to delete the entire section 2 and replace with the following. Section 2, Declaration of Policy, Article 3, Section 6 of the Constitution provides that the right to travel shall not be impaired except in the interest of national security, public safety, or public health, as may be provided by law. It is the policy of the state to protect the people's constitutional right to travel while ensuring issuance of passport or any other travel document in line with international instruments and using secure passport personalization and data management technologies to enhance and protect the unimpaired exercise of the right to travel. The state shall only prescribe minimum requirements for the application and issuance of passports and other travel documents.
There being no objection, that's the motion? for
Yes,
that amendment?
this being the motion to
Yes,
amend.
amend. There being no objection to the motion, the amendment is adopted.
The second amendment, proposed individually on page 2, line 10, to insert the phrase certificate of marriage, report of marriage, after the words report of birth. That is to say, Section 3B will now read as follows. B, biographic data refers to an individual's full name, birth date, birthplace, and sex as recorded in the certificate of live birth, report of birth, certificate of marriage, report of marriage, or certificate of foundling. I so move.
There be no objection to the amendment. Amendments approved.
On page 2, line 16, the subsection on the Convention on International Civil Aviation or Chicago Convention will be renumbered as subsection G. I so move.
There be no objection. Amendments approved.
On page 2, line 19, to add a period after the word services, and thereafter add the words, it was before the word sign. I so move.
There be no objection. Amendments approved.
On the same page and line, to delete the word which.
There be no objection. Amendments approved.
On page 2, line 21, the subsection on consular offices, open parenthesis, CO, close parenthesis, will be renumbered as subsection D.
There be no objection. Amendments approved.
On page 2, line 25, the subsection on consular official will be renumbered as subsection E. I so move.
There be no objection. Motion is approved.
On page 2, line 26, replace the word and with or.
There be no objection. Amendments approved.
On page 2, line 28, to insert a new subsection F, which shall read as follows. F. Consular services refers to services relating to the exercise of consular functions such as issuing passports, other travel documents, and visas, acting as notary and civil registrar, and all other related functions and capacities. I so move.
There be no objection. Amendments adopted.
On page 2, line 29, the subsection on foundling will be renumbered as subsection I. I so move.
There be no objection. Amendments approved.
On page 2, lines 29 to 32, replace the definition of foundling with the following. Refers to a deserted or abandoned child or infant with unknown facts of birth and parentage. This includes a person who has been duly registered as a foundling during his or her infancy or childhood, but has reached the age of majority without benefiting from adoption procedures. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, lines 2 to 6, to replace the definition of emergency travel document with the following. Refers to a document issued by the Philippine government to travelers in emergency situations where it is not possible to issue a regular passport, semicolon. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, line 8, the subsection of fugitives from justice will be renumbered as subsection J.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, lines 8 to 10, replace the definition of fugitives from justice with the following. Refers to those who flee under the following circumstances. 1, after conviction by a Philippine court to avoid punishment, or 2, after being charged in a Philippine court to avoid prosecution. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 3, line 12, the subsection on foreign service post, FSPs, will be renumbered as subsection K.
There
I
being
so
no
move.
objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, line 15, the subsection on ICAO will be renumbered as subsection L. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, lines 15 to 18, replace the whole subsection with the following. International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, refers to the specialized agency of the United Nations, UN, that manages the administration and governance of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, or the Chicago Convention, of which the Philippines became a party in 1947. I so move.
There being no objection, Amendments approved.
On page 3, line 20, the subsection on issuing authority to be renumbered as subsection M. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, line 24, the subsection on legal guardians will be renumbered as subsection N, Norway. I
There being
so
no
move.
objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, line 25, to delete the comma after the word law. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On the same page and line, to delete the word over before the words persons. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page and line, replace the word over after the word persons with the word above. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 3, lines 30 to 31, delete the entire subsection N on large scale.
There
I
being
so
no
move.
objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, lines 1 to 5, replace the definition of machine-readable travel document with the following. Refers to a travel document conforming with the specifications contained in ICAO document 9303. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 11, insert the new subsections Q and R, which respectively read as follows. Q, passport personalization. The process by which the biometric data, biographical data, and the signature are applied to the passport. R, passporting services refers to services relating to the processing, encoding, transmission, personalization, and releasing of passports, including online services and all other related functions and capacities. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 12, the subsection on recognized alien residents will be renumbered as subsection S.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 16, the subsection on refugee to be renumbered as subsection T, Tokyo. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 24, the subsection on stateless person will be renumbered as subsection U. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 4, lines 27 to 29, to delete the entire subsection T, Tokyo, on syndicate. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 4, line 30, to insert a new subsection subsection V, which shall read as follows. V, travel document refers to an official document issued by the Philippine government and is used by the holder for international travel. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 5, line 1, add the abbreviation DFA before the word secretary and thereafter enclose the words DFA secretary in quotation marks. Thereafter, I propose an omnibus amendment to add DFA before the word secretary pertaining to the Secretary of Foreign Relations every time it is mentioned in the bill. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 5, line 1, to replace the word officer with official. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 5, line 9, sections 4 and 9 with sections 5 and 9. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Page 5, line 11, to delete the word however. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 5, line 15, to add the phrase to allow for a safe return journey by a Filipino to the Philippines after the word document. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 5, line 17, to add the words application and before the word issuance. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 5, line 21, to insert a new subsection A, which reads as follows. A, personal appearance for biometric and biographical data capturing. I so move.
There being, is it biographical or biographic data capturing?
Biographic data capturing. Thank you, Senate President.
Thank you. There being no objection, motion is approved.
To renumber the succeeding subsections accordingly. On page 5, line 24, add the word S in the word include and replace and
Replace the
replace
word
are with is. I
There
so
being no
move.
objection, motion is approved.
On page 5, line 28, to delete the phrase or its successor agency. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, line 5, replace the word of after the word certificate with and. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, lines 10 to 11, to delete the phrase individual's record in Philippine Identification System, open quote, PhilSys, close quote, as provided for in section 6 of, close quote, and replace with applicants, Phil ID issued pursuant to. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, lines 12 to 13, delete open quote, and its future amendments, close quote.
There
I
being
so
no
move.
objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, line 17, delete the phrase or its successor agency.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, line 21, delete the word authenticated. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, lines 23 and 24, to delete the phrase or its successor agency. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 6, line 31, replace the abbreviation DSWD with Department of Social Welfare and Development. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 2, delete the abbreviation CDCLAA. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Page 7, line 3, delete the abbreviation NACC. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 4, replace the phrase otherwise known as with or. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 7, to insert the phrase the renewal of passports by between the words for and applicants. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 7 to 8, replace for before migrant with by and delete the phrase who are renewing their passports. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 11, delete the phrase open quote as far as practicable, close quote. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 2, insert a new subsection to read as follows. For applicants who are unable to read or write, persons with disabilities, open quote, PWDs, close quote, or senior citizens, they may be assisted by a relative within the fourth civil degree of consanguinity or affinity, or by the traveling companion of the applicant. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Renumber the succeeding subsections accordingly.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 15, to delete the phrase provided however that. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, lines 17 to 18, to delete the phrase or its successor agency or the local civil registry office, LCRO. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, line 22, to insert the phrase report of marriage, comma, or between the words or and laws. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 7, lines 25 to 30, to replace the whole subsection with the following. L, London. For government officials or employees seeking to apply for a diplomatic or official passport, they shall submit a travel authority issued by the head of the department, agency, or office, or such head's duly authorized representative.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
In our copies, Senate President, there's a number 61 that follows, but we have deleted the same. We will proceed to number 62. On page 8, lines 2 and 3, after the word required, delete the words the following. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 8, lines 8 to 28, delete the entire section 7, renumber the succeeding successions accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 9, line 6, to add a hyphen between the words vice and presidents. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 10, line 2, delete the phrase "accorded full powers by the Senate" and replace with "duly authorized to represent the country." I so move.
There being no objection, amendment approved.
On page 10, line 16, to add the word "and" before the word "all." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 10, lines 24 to 26, delete "not exceeding 2 persons, provided that an increase in domestic service and household members of such officials shall be approved by the Secretary." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 11, line 10 to 12, delete the sentence "the spouse and minor children of persons entitled to diplomatic or official passports shall be issued regular passports if they are not accompanying or following to join them." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 11, line 13, to insert the paragraph, "The DFA shall prescribe the number of pages of passport booklets based on international standards and best practices, provided that an option to apply for a passport booklet with additional pages shall be made available subject to reasonable fees as may be determined by the DFA Secretary." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 11, lines 14 to 27, delete the whole subsection D and insert a new section which shall read as follows: emergency travel documents, types of emergency travel documents. 1. Emergency passport shall be issued to Filipino travelers who have lost their passports while traveling overseas and are justifiably in need to complete their intended overseas travel prior to return in the Philippines or their residence overseas. This shall be valid for 1 year from the date of issuance. And 2, emergency travel certificate shall be issued to Filipinos returning to the Philippines who have lost their passports overseas or cannot be issued a regular passport. This certificate shall be valid for 30 days up to 6 months from the date of issuance. The Filipinos, alien spouse, and children who are traveling to or are returning to permanent residence of the Philippines may also be issued an emergency travel certificate. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 11, lines 29 to 32 up to page 12, lines 1 and 2, delete the whole subsection E and insert a new section which shall read as follows: convention travel document. A convention travel document shall be issued for a stateless person who is likewise a permanent resident or a refugee granted such status or asylum in the Philippines. This document shall be valid for 5 years from the date of issuance. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 12, lines 4 to 5, add a semicolon after the phrase "issuance of passport" and thereafter delete the word "or." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page and line, add a semicolon after the phrase "cancellation of passport." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 12, line 9, insert the phrase "issuance of" in between the words "of" and "passport." I so move.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 12, lines 11 to 17, replace subparagraphs 1 and 2 with the following. 1. Upon orders of the court to hold the departure of an individual. 2. Upon submission of a duly notarized request by the person exercising parental authority over a minor or incapacitated applicant. Period.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 12, line 20, to replace the semicolon with a period.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Okay.
Page 15.
Page 15.
Page 15 of your amendments, rather.
Yes, of the
Yes.
amendments, that's correct. Yes, we have replaced the number 79 in your copy with a new amendment. If you will follow me on page 12, line 20, after the semicolon, add the word "or."
There being no objection to the motion, amendments approved.
The original number 79 in that list is deleted. Instead, we go further to number 80, page 12, line 26, replace on with upon. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Page 81, number 81, page 12, line 30, replace on with upon. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 13, lines 1 to 7, replace the whole subparagraph 3 with the following. 3. Upon orders of the court, when the holder is a suspected terrorist charged with any violation under sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 of Republic Act number 11479, or the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, provided that the passport may be issued upon A, acquittal of the accused, B, dismissal of the case filed against such person, or C, the discretion of the court on the motion of the prosecutor or of the accused. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 13, line 15, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. Denial of passport application or cancellation of passport for reasons other than by order of the court may be appealed to the DFA secretary. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 13, line 16, replace the second of with on. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 13, line 25, replace the words United Nations with the abbreviation UN. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 13, lines 28 to 32, up to page 14, lines 2 to 27, delete both sections and replace with the following. Passport database. The DFA shall maintain and operate its own database which shall contain the following. A, applicants' biographical data, biometric data, demographic data. B, record of denials, cancellations, stolen and lost passports. And C, such other information as may be necessary to implement this act. The DFA, in coordination with the Department of Information and Communications Technology, National Privacy Commission, the PSA, and other pertinent agencies shall implement appropriate organizational, technical, and physical security measures to ensure that the information gathered for the passport database is protected against tampering, loss, destruction, damage, and unauthorized access, use, and disclosure. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 14, lines 29 to 31, delete the entire section and renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 15, line 2, delete the word however. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 15, lines 9 to 10, delete the phrase, the holder being a mere possessor thereof for the duration of the passport's validity. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 15, line 11, delete the phrase government through the department and replace with the abbreviation DFA. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 15, line 13, delete the phrase confiscated passport or travel document to the department and replace with same to DFA. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 15, line 14, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. Persons who confiscate or otherwise withhold a passport without authority, therefore, shall be punished in accordance with Section 22E of this Act. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Delete page 15, lines 21 to 29, up to page 16, lines 1 to 22, and renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 16, lines 24 to 30, up to page 17, lines 1 to 8, replace the whole section with the following. Loss or destruction of a passport. The loss or destruction of a passport shall be immediately reported to the DFA or a foreign service post by submitting an affidavit stating in detail the circumstances of such loss or destruction. A person who subsequently manages to locate his or her lost passport shall turn over the same to the DFA. An affidavit stating the location of the passport and the person or entity in possession thereof shall be submitted in case physical turnover of the lost passport is not feasible. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 17, lines 10 to 17, replace the entire section with the following. Fees, Reasonable fees shall be collected for the processing and issuance of a passport or a travel document, provided that any fee shall not be increased more than once every 3 years. Senior citizens and PWDs shall be entitled to a 20% discount on the application fees. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 17, lines 20 to 21, to delete the phrase "with the assistance and cooperation of other agencies involved in the procurement and issuance of the requirements enumerated in Section 5 of this Act, the." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 17, line 22, to add the word "the" before the abbreviation DFA and thereafter insert a comma and the phrase "in coordination with other pertinent government agencies."
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Okay. All right, on page 17, line 26, insert the hyphen after the words "fund" and "a." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
In our listing, there are amendments number 100 to 103 that I will defer for the moment, as they all refer to the passport revolving fund. We will defer them following further information to be provided by the DFA. So let us proceed to page 18, line 10, insert a new section which shall read as follows. Off-site and mobile passport services. The DFA may provide off-site and mobile passport services in areas outside of the consular offices and foreign service posts. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 18, line 11, delete the phrase "or his duly authorized representative." I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 18, line 14, to insert a comma after the word "act" and thereafter add the phrase "on humanitarian grounds." I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 18, line 16 to 23, to replace the entire section with the following. Setting up special lanes. The DFA shall arrange accommodations for the application of regular passports for senior citizens, PWDs, pregnant women, minors aged 7 and below, solo parents, overseas Filipino workers, and individuals with emergency and exceptional cases through the creation of special lanes. The DFA shall arrange accommodations for regular passport applications of Muslim Filipinos who are intending pilgrims to the annual Hajj pilgrimage, which shall be for a period of 4 months, commencing on the date indicated in the official request by the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Interchange the numbering of the sections on waiver and the setting up of special lanes. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 18, lines 25 to 31, up to page 25, lines 1 to 23, replace the entire section with the following. Offenses and penalties. A, offenses relating to illegal withholding of passport. Penalties. Any person or entity without legal authority who confiscates, retains, or withholds any passport issued by the DFA shall suffer the penalty of imprisonment of not less than 12 years and 1 day, but not more than 20 years, and shall pay a fine of not less than 1 million pesos, but not more than 2 million pesos, provided that the prosecution under this act shall be without prejudice to any liability for violation of Republic Act 8042 or the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 as amended. B, offenses relating to issuances, penalties, imprisonment of not less than 6 years and 1 day, but not more than 12 years, and a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, but not more than 250,000 pesos, shall be imposed upon any person or entity who, 1, acts or claims to act in any capacity or office under the Republic of the Philippines without lawful authority, accepts the passport applications, grants, issues, or verifies any passport or other travel document to any or for any person whomsoever, or is caught stealing or is caught selling in whatever capacity passport application forms or lost or stolen passports and travel documents. 2, acts or claims to act in any capacity with intention to profit thereby, intercepts a person proceeding to the DFA or any of its consular offices or foreign service posts to apply for a passport or other travel document, and persuades, entices, encourages, or misleads such applicant to course the application through another person or agency other than the DFA or its personnel on the pretext of facilitating its approval or issuance by the DFA. 3, being neither a diplomatic or consular official, nor an employee authorized to grant, issue, or verify any passport or other travel document to or for any person, and even though not claiming to be such, offers for any material gain or consideration to escort a passport applicant or assist the same in booking an appointment, filling out an application form, making payments, handling application documents, or any other action relating to passport application. 4, hoarding and/or selling of online passport appointment slots for pecuniary gain or advantage. 5, being a diplomatic or consular official authorized to grant, issue, or verify passports, knowingly and willfully grants, issues, or verifies any such passport to any or for any person not a citizen of the Republic of the Philippines. Or 6, being a diplomatic or consular officer, knowingly and willfully grants, issues, or certifies to the authenticity of any passport or other travel document for any person not entitled thereto, or knowingly and willfully issues more than one passport to any person except as provided for in this Act. C, offenses relating to forgery, penalties, imprisonment of not less than 6 years and 1 day to 12 years, and a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, but not more than 250,000 pesos, shall be imposed upon any person or entity who willfully and knowingly, 1, counterfeits, mutilates, or alters any passport or other travel document or any supporting document for a passport application. The possession of the documents herein mentioned shall be prima facie evidence of the commission of the facts enumerated therein. Willfully or knowingly uses or attempts to use or furnishes to another for use any such forged, counterfeited, mutilated, altered, or canceled passport for other travel document. The page continues with a proviso, but this is deleted for this purpose, and we proceed instead to D, offenses relating to improper use of passports, other travel documents, and supporting documents. Penalties, imprisonment of not less than 6 years and 1 day, not more than 12 years, and a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, not more than 250,000, shall be imposed upon any person who willfully and knowingly, 1, uses or attempts to use any passport or other travel document issued for the use of another. 2, uses or attempts to use any supporting document belonging to another. Or 3, sells, trades, pawns, mortgages, or uses a passport or other travel document as collateral to secure debt, or in any manner uses such passport or other travel document as current or object of commerce, provided that in such situation the buyer, trader, creditor, or mortgagee shall also be liable to the same extent as the passport travel document holder. E, offenses relating to false statements, penalties, imprisonment of not less than 18 months and 1 day, not more than 6 years, and a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, but not more than 250,000 pesos, shall be imposed upon any person who willfully and knowingly, 1, makes any false statement in any application for passport or other travel document with the intent to induce or secure the issuance of a passport or other travel document contrary to this Act or rules and regulations prescribed pursuant thereto. 2, makes any false statement in an affidavit declaring a passport or other travel document as lost or destroyed. Or 3, uses or attempts to use any passport or other travel document which was secured in any way by reason of false statement. F, offenses pertaining to unfair and discriminatory practices. Any violation of Section 6 of this Act shall warrant the following penalties and liabilities. 1. First offense, administrative liability with 6-month suspension. Second offense, administrative liability and criminal liability of dismissal from service, perpetual disqualification from holding public office, forfeiture of retirement benefits, and imprisonment of 18 months and 1 day to 6 months with a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos, but not more than 250,000 pesos. 6 years with a fine, just to clarify. G, syndicate. The penalties provide or large scale. Syndicate or large scale. The penalties provided for under this section shall be imposed in their maximum term when the offenses are committed by a syndicate or on a large scale. The offense is deemed committed by a syndicate if carried out by a group of 3 or more persons conspiring or confederating with one another. It is deemed committed in large scale if committed against 3 or more persons individually or as a group. H, offender is a public official. In addition to the penalties prescribed in this section, the offender shall be dismissed from service and shall suffer perpetual absolute disqualification to hold office. And now we have I. Offender is a corporation, partnership, association, or any juridical person. The penalty prescribed in this section shall be imposed upon the president, partner, manager, and/or any responsible officer of the corporation, association, or juridical person who directly participated in the commission of the violation of this act and allowed its perpetuation and continuance, provided that in every case the criminal conviction of the liable person shall cause and carry the automatic revocation of the business license and/or special certificate of accreditation or certificate of registration of the corporation, partnership, association, or the juridical person. Provided further that these entities and the persons who are criminally held liable for the violation of this act shall not be allowed to operate similar establishments under different names. J, offender is an alien. In addition to the penalties prescribed in this section, the alien shall be deported upon serving the sentence and be permanently barred from re-entering the Philippines. I so move, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I congratulate the sponsor for being patient enough to read that very long amendment. I think it was about 6 pages long. There being no objection, amendment is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We're almost
Subject
there.
to style. Subject to style, because there was a
Subject
few.
to style, there are
yeah.
a few errors,
Yeah,
yes.
few errors when being read.
And page 25, line 24, to insert a new section to read as follows. Appropriations. The amount necessary for effective implementation of this act shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
To renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 25, lines 25 to 27, replace the entire section with the following: implementing rules and regulations. Within 60 days from effectivity, the DFA shall promulgate the necessary rules and regulations for the proper implementation of this act. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 25, lines 28 to 30, up to page 26, lines 1 and 2, replace the entire section with the following repealing clause. All laws, presidential decrees, executive orders, letters of instruction, proclamations, or administrative regulations that are inconsistent with the provisions of this act are hereby repealed, amended, or modified accordingly. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 26, lines 3 to 5, replace the entire section with the following: separability clause. If any provision of this act is declared unconstitutional, the remainder thereof, not otherwise affected, shall remain in force and effect. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Interchange the numbering of the repealing clause and the separability clause. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Page 26, lines 6 to 8, replace the entire section with the following effectivity. This act shall take effect after 15 days following the completion of its publication, either in the official gazette or in the news paper of general circulation. I so move.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
And last but not least, the new title shall read as follows: An Act Providing for a New Passport Law, repealing for this purpose Republic Act 8239, otherwise known as the Philippine Passport Act of 1996 as amended, and providing funds therefor. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
Thank you very much. That will be all.
Thank you very much, our distinguished colleague. our
And
colleagues'
may I
patience.
move at this juncture, Majority Leader and Mr. President, for the suspension of these amendments presented because of the request for further information from the DFA regarding the passport revolving fund.
Yes, the period of amendments. She's
Yes,
asking
we
for
share the
suspension
sentiment
period
of the author, Mr. President. We join her motion to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2001. So move, Mr. President.
Yes, and I know this is going to be a lot of work for our secretariat, but if they can produce the clean copy so that we can study this again for tomorrow. So there be no objection to the motion, the majority floor leader. The subject of concern, the bill is suspended for
you.
consideration.
Thank you
Very much to the sponsor. May I ask for a minute suspension so that this, your presiding officer can use, oh no, please, I will defer to my majority leader.
I can go.
Okay, session, so continue, please.
Yes,
proceed.
Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2386 under Committee Report number 99. This bill pertains to the Real Property Valuation and Assessment Act. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we have sponsored the bill, and now we move to open the period of interpellations and debate and recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, and to interpellate Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved. Senator Bato de la Rosa to interpolate, and our distinguished colleague, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian to sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
From the great province of Davao and Bohol, Senator Bato de la Rosa is recognized to interpellate the sponsor of the measure, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, for the record, I would like to commend our very hardworking sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, for sponsoring this Real Property Valuation and Assessment Reform Act. Would a good gentleman yield to a few clarificatory questions?
Thank you, Mr. President, for the kind words, and I'll be more than happy to receive questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, good sponsor. Mr. President, can the good sponsors spread into the record the objectives of the proposed bill and what current real property valuation issues can be addressed through the measure?
Okay, thank you, Mr. President, for that question. Mr. President, there are three overarching objectives of this bill. Number one is to mandate uniform market values across different government agencies, not only local governments, but also other national government agencies. Number two is to digitalize the collection of taxes, particularly from local government units. And then number 3 is to improve fiscal capacity of our local government units. So these are the 3 overarching goals of this bill, Mr. President. And Mr. President, just to cite an example, to date there are 23 different national agencies as well as government agencies doing different market valuations and land appraisals, Mr. President. I'll cite a very specific example. The BIR, they have what they call the zonal valuation, and the zonal valuation is being used, and I'll just flash it on the screen, Mr. President. These are the different government agencies that conduct land appraisals and issue market valuations, Mr. President. The BIR, they have the zonal valuation, and the zonal valuation is used for transactions on land. For example, if you sell land, you pay capital gains based on zonal valuation or the purchase price, whichever, the purchase or selling price, whichever is higher. The local government unit, they have their own market valuation or land valuation, and they use that for real property taxes. Even the BOI and the DPWH, Mr. President, they also have their own land appraisals and market valuations. For DPWH, for Mr. President, for DPWH, they use it for their expropriation. Earlier during the hearing on the DOTR, I heard the good gentleman from Davao that the Mindanao Rail will encroach or traverse on his house, and
will destroy.
it will
Really destroy
absolutely
completely.
It will completely and absolutely destroy his house in Davao del Sur, if I'm not mistaken. So in projects like that, the DPWH or the DOTR will appraise your land, will appraise your structures, and they do their own appraisals. And most likely, they use various sources. The local government, they probably will use private appraisers. They'll probably use third-party appraisers. So in the screen, these are the different agencies that conduct different appraisals and market values. So with this bill, it will be uniform to all. So the local government will be in charge, or the assessors in the local governments will be in charge in coming out with the market values, and that market values will be used by all of these different government agencies. So there'll be uniform market values across different users of these market values.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that very clarifying answer. So, based on the proposed bill, what are the duties and responsibilities of the LGUs if this will be enacted into law?
Thank you, Mr. President. To explain this in a very simple manner, Mr. President, I'll flash a slide. This is slide 2. Let me just flash on the screen. Slide 2. This is a very simple formula that the local governments use in order to come up with a fair market value. All of us who own property, we pay our local governments real property taxes. And the real property taxes is computed using 3 variables: the schedule of fair market value under the local government code, the assessment level, and the tax rate, all of which is on the screen, Mr. President, so that it's easy to explain. So all of these variables are being determined by the local government units. That's the responsibility of the local government units. But in the current proposal, Mr. President, we will use standards to determine the market value of property. That's the only variable that will be mandated under this proposal. The assessment level and the tax rates will remain with the local government units. So meaning the local government can still dictate what assessment levels, what tax rates they will impose, so that the assessment levels and the tax rates will be responsive to the situation in their own jurisdiction, Mr. President. So we will not touch that. No? So in other words, even we enact this law, Mr. President, the local government has the power to reduce the tax due being paid by their constituents, or make it status quo, meaning hindi ho aakyat, hindi bababa, or they can make it, they can increase it. No? That's their own political decision on to make, and that depends on the situation on the ground in their own jurisdictions, Mr. President. So in a nutshell, that's the responsibility of the local government unit.
Thank you, good sponsor. To follow it up, considering the responsibilities of our concerned LGUs under the proposed bill, may we know if they have manifested the support to the proposed measure? Did the Committee on Ways and Means receive any position paper from the League of Provinces, League of Cities, League of Municipalities in the Philippines? If the answer is no, what are the reasons for not submitting their position paper? Do you think their support is crucial to ensure effective implementation of this bill? Or if their answer is yes, may we know if they support in toto or they have reservations to some of the provisions of the bill?
Hold on, Mr. President. I'll just get the exact letter.
Ito yung mga nag-attend, sir. If you want to mention.
Okay. Okay. Mr. President, the ULAP sent us letter. The Union of Local Authorities in the Philippines sent us a letter. However, the letter is unsigned, no? And we're requesting for a signed letter. But let me just nevertheless read the contents of the letter while we're pulling it out. But Mr. President, notwithstanding the contents of the letter, the ULAP, through Attorney Canlas Jr., attended the first public hearing, the first public hearing on March 2, 2023, the technical working group on March 16, 2023, on another technical working group on March 29, 2023, on another technical working group on April 13, 2023. So in other words, Attorney Canlas, who's representing the Union of Local Authorities in the Philippines, attended the public hearing and the 4 technical working groups. And in those hearings, he participated in crafting of this bill. He did not voice out any opposition in this bill. In fact, he gave a lot of good points to improve the proposed measure. And on top of that, Mr. President, we also invited the League of Provinces, and the League of Provinces was represented by Ms. Angelica Sanchez, who attended 3 technical working groups. The Provincial Board Members League of the Philippines, represented by Attorney Canlas as well, attended 2 technical working groups. The League of Cities, represented by Ms. Monterde, attended the first public hearing and the 3 technical working groups. And the Philippine Councilors League, represented by by Councilor Handy Lau, who is the president, attended 1 technical working group. The League of Municipalities, represented by Attorney Ann De Vera, attended 3 technical working groups. So, Mr. President, they did not send us an official position paper. Nevertheless, they were physically present in the technical working groups, in the public hearings, and in all of those meetings which were recorded by our secretariat. They did not voice out any opposition in the bill. In fact, they participated, and the transcripts will bear out that they participated and contributed to the discussion and the crafting of the bill.
Thank you, good sponsor. The reason why I asked this question, because, the workload of this, once this bill is passed into law, the implementation of this law will be
Unsigned.
on the shoulders of the local government units. So
Yeah,
we have to make sure that they will be implementing this law properly, Mr. Good Sponsor, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, that's absolutely correct. In fact, that is the concern of the local government units. And that's why in the measure, we also included financial support for the local government units,
Very good.
especially
Very
for especially for sixth, fifth, fourth, third-class municipalities for equity purposes. We also gave priority to small local government units in terms of assisting them with technical expertise, with digitalization, with even financial support. And you're absolutely correct. The local government units will play a very significant role in this proposed measure.
Thank you, Good Sponsor, Mr. President. Under the proposed measure, the Bureau of Local Government Finance of the Department of Finance shall develop, adopt, maintain, and implement uniform valuation standards which shall be used by all appraisers and assessors in the LGUs and other concerned parties or agencies that conduct valuation in the appraisal or valuation of lands, buildings, machinery, and other real property for taxation purposes. For the record, may we know from the Good Sponsor, will the proposed measure affect the local autonomy of the LGUs?
Mr. President, no, it will not affect the local autonomy. And again, let me just flash on the screen the formula, because this is a very important formula. It determines what the local governments are empowered to do and what the local governments and what the law will mandate the BLGF will do. So in this, if you look at the new, under the RPVAR, which is the abbreviation for this law, the local governments will still have to debate, consult their constituents insofar as assessment level is concerned, no? And insofar as tax rates are concerned. What is being mandated under the law that will be crafted by the assessor and approved by the BLGF insofar as standards is concerned is only the schedule of market values, Mr. President. So in my opinion, Mr. President, the autonomy will still remain because the local governments, again, no, the scenario is the local governments have three outcomes. Number one is lower down the tax due of their constituents. Number two is status quo. And number three is if they want to raise it, they can raise it. And they can use two variables to do that, the assessment levels and the tax rates.
Thank you, Good Sponsor. It's very clear, no, on your presentation that the power of the local government unit is really not taken away from them on the second box wherein the Sanggunian is going to approve the finished product coming from the scheduled market value. So may malaki pa rin ang papel nila dyan.
Yes, Mr. President. And also in the law, we specifically stated in Section 16 that this law shall not be construed to abridge the power of the LGUs to lower and adjust assessment levels and tax rates in accordance with the provisions of Republic Act Number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, as amended, particularly on the ceilings and limitations imposed therein.
Thank you, Mr. Good Sponsor. My follow-up question is, the proposed measure likewise requires the enactment of an ordinance not later than 120 days prior to the end of the taxable calendar year from receipt thereof. Assuming that this is not complied by the Sanggunian, are there any penalties provided under the proposed measure for this? How do we ensure compliance from the LGUs during its implementation?
then what else? Ito, diba?
Yes, sir, yun yung specific.
But ito.
Sir, questionable kasi because of the injury to the document.
Ito pwede mong gamitin.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, that's for elective, then that's for lawyer assessors. Pero in the law, sir, may specific siya. Failure or refusal.
Yeah, but that's for the assessor.
Yes, sir, for the assessor.
Mr. President, the question is, what penalties can be imposed on the elected officials?
Yes, assuming that the Sanggunian is not going to comply, because you said there that the proposed measure likewise requires the enactment of an ordinance not later than 120 days prior to the end of the taxable calendar year from receipt thereof. So, kung ito'y hindi i-comply ng Sanggunian, may nakalagay ba tayong penalties to ensure their cooperation or their compliance in the implementation of this law? So, kung wala naman siguro problema kung...
Well, Mr. President, it's not explicit in the law what will be the penalty against the Sanggunian, but there are other laws that govern the operations of the local government units,
Yes.
including the Sanggunian Pangbayan or Sanggunian Panglunsod, as the case may be. Number one is the Anti-Graft Law, Section 3F of the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, and let me just read letter F, neglecting or refusing, after due demand or without sufficient justification, to act within a reasonable time frame on any matter pending before him for purposes of obtaining directly or indirectly from any person interested in the matter some pecuniary or material benefit or advantage in favor of or discriminating against another interested party. So that's one of the remedies that can be imposed against the Sanggunian. The other one is under the Local Government Code, Section 60C, dishonesty, oppression, misconduct in office, gross negligence, and dereliction of duty. So this can be triggered as well by the Office of the President. Since the Office of the President has supervisory powers over the local government units, Section 60C of the Local Government Code can be triggered by, let's say, the BLGF or the DOF filing complaints before the Office of the President, and the Office of the President can prosecute local government units using this provision in the Local Government Code.
Anyway, Mr. President, we'll just assume that the members of the Sanggunian are elected officials of their local government units, di ba? So we hope that they will be responsible enough in carrying out their mandates and performing their assigned duties. So wala ko nakikita problema dito, but yung nga lang, worst situation, pag ini-ignore tayo, hindi pinapansin ang hindi lang ginagawa yung kanilang trabaho, so naghahanap tayo ng solusyon. But anyway, hindi naman ganun masyadong mabigat yan.
Well, Mr. President, I mentioned earlier that one of the overarching objectives of this bill is to improve fiscal capacity of our LGUs. And we all know, you being we gave you a moniker here in the Senate of the chairman of the folder committee, Mr. President. No. So I think the good gentleman from Davao is very knowledgeable on how many folders we receive every day or every so often, especially now it's a budget season. And the direction of this bill is to improve the fiscal capacity of our local government units by updating their market values, the schedule of their market values, and also doing revision work in terms of their real property taxes so they can have that fiscal capacity. Because they cannot forever come to us or come to the national agencies and almost beg for projects for their constituents. Although I understand where they're coming from, and I do acknowledge that there are many requirements for their jurisdiction and for their constituents. But one of the ways to satisfy those requirements is to improve your fiscal capacity, by updating your real property taxes. But if you're not going to update your real property taxes, obviously you won't have any fiscal capacity, and you'll resort to sending folders to the chairman of the folder committee or all of us here. So the direction really, Mr. President, the gentleman from Davao, is to improve the fiscal capacity of a local government, so they have the ability to create projects, the ability to help their constituents, the ability to come up with programs that will alleviate the conditions of their local government.
And it should not be taken lightly, the importance of the responsibility given to the chairperson of the Committee on Folders of the Senate, the gentleman from Davao.
Well, I hope, Mr. President, the good sponsor is showing a very positive sign of optimism as far as implementation of this law is concerned, because nakikita naman talaga natin that this will enhance the fiscal capability of the LGU. So we expect na talagang i-implement nila itong batas na ito properly. Well, Mr. President, my follow-up question for that is that did the committee consider the fact that there are property owners who have been remiss in paying their monthly amortization because of the pandemic, and the possible increase in real property taxes will add burden to their current financial predicament?
Yes. Mr. President, I once again want to reiterate that it really depends on the local government whether they want to increase the tax due of their constituents or not. No? All what we are uniforming here are the schedule of market values across different government agencies. But as to how much tax or how much real property taxes their constituents will pay, it's really up to the local government units. And the local government units can decide that there's no increase. No? So their constituents will not bear the brunt of the effects of the pandemic. But on top of that, Mr. President, on a case-to-case basis, constituents can come to their local chief executive and ask for reprieve, formally or informally. That's being practiced in local government units. Sometimes the local government, when I was a mayor, I remember the first or the second year of my mayorship, we implemented a amnesty. So the whole city enjoyed amnesty, meaning those who owe local governments, the penalties and interest will be condoned, and you will be given X amount of time to pay. No? So that's another remedy that local governments can use to help their constituents. The other one is constituents can come to you, and they can request for an extension period to pay their tax dues. No? And they'll come up with some payment plans, and it's really up to the local government unit through their local chief executive to accommodate their constituents, no, depending on the situation. It can be formal, meaning they can give a letter and sign it between them, or it can be informal. No? The mayor can just say, okay, you can pay the local government at the end of the year, but these are the interest payments. Of course, penalties and interest should have the corresponding ordinance, no, to condone. But the mayor can extend the payment terms depending on the situation. So my point of the matter, Mr. President, is the local government has many ways of helping their constituents in terms of payments and in terms of granting amnesties, Mr. President.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. President. You're a good sponsor. Pasensya ka na at hindi ako dumaan sa local government unit. Hindi ko po alam yung ginagawa mo. At thank you for that information. That would be very enriching as far as spreading into the records of this into the records of the Senate yung explanation mo.
Yeah, but Mr. President, I just also want to point out, no, aside from that, that's in the payment side, no, but insofar as this proposal is concerned, Mr. President, in section 19, no, and let me just read the section. In case of any significant change in market value where the property is located after the schedule of market value has been approved and prior to the next revision, such as introduction of road right-of-way or similar infrastructure in times of calamities, disaster, whether man-made or natural, during a pandemic or a declared public health emergency, whether national or localized, and other analogous adverse circumstances, or where corrections of errors or inequalities in the SMVs is deemed necessary, the provincial city assessors can recommend revisions in their existing schedule of market values to the BLGF. So in other words, Mr. President, if there's a pandemic or let's say bumaha po, no, the assessor can recommend to lower down the schedule of market values. So obviously, Mr. President, if let's say there's a disaster in the area, the market values for properties will go down drastically, and the assessor can recommend right away to lower down the value of those properties, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor. In closing, I just would like to thank our good sponsor for answering our questions today and for enriching the records of this august body, specifically on ensuring that the local autonomy of the LGUs will be upheld and as a tool to expedite automation in revenue collection. Again, thank you, Mr. President, good sponsor.
Thank you, Mr.
Maraming
President,
salamat.
and I thank the good gentleman from Davao, and I wish you luck in your I wish you luck and I wish you all the best, especially when your house gets destroyed by the Mindanao Rail, and I hope that you get the best fair market value for your properties in that area because of the Mindanao Rail. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank
I
you.
was given the assurance by DOTR that it's not yet too soon. So I can return back all my personal belongings to my house so that medyo malabo pa daw. But anyway, thank you for that, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much, the good gentleman from Davao.
Yes. Session suspended. Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have a list of a number of senators who wanted to interpolate, but due to the lateness of the hour, may I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2386. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, September 13, 2023. I so move, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Before I adjourn, I'd just like to thank our colleagues in the minority and the majority for a very productive day today. There be no objection to the motion of our afternoon, Wednesday, September 13, 2023. Have a safe evening, everyone.